everyone, Brendan here from Games, Brains and a Head-Banging Life. We're doing another exhumation, and this time we are going to a darker subject, a tougher subject to talk about, and we're going to try and give it the best respect we possibly can while answering some of our own questions about our personal thoughts. It's not a deep dive into the event, so to speak. It's more about our own personal thoughts and feelings on it, and it is, you saw the title, The Murder of Dimebag Darrell. Darrell Lance Abbott, best known, of course, by his stage name, Dimebag Darrell. He was an American musician and songwriter, guitarist of heavy metal band Pantera and Damageplan, both of which he co-founded alongside his brother, Vinnie Paul. So first question, then from this, earliest memories of Dimebag? I struggle with this one.
I mean, era-wise, it would be Vulgar Display of Power.
Okay.
My Dimebag love was always there because I loved the guitars. But the problem when I got into Pantera, it was Phil. It was all about Phil.
Yep.
Scowling and fucking, frowning at people and all that sort of shit.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think my first real appreciation probably came, like proper appreciation probably came from when from the Great Southern Trendkill, which is quite, a few years after that, and was the song Floods.
Oh, so that was like the first song you thought, wow, this guy can play.
Yeah, I always thought like, wow, this guy can play, and I loved it, and I loved the solos and that, but it was just my obsession was Phil. Do you know what I mean? So I knew Dimebag was, I knew he was a guitarist, I thought the solos are great, the riffs were great, everything was great, but it was Phil I was obsessed with. And it was then really, I guess, because I was, you're talking 4 years after then, and yeah, I'm getting a bit older, I'm probably starting to appreciate different levels of the music, and that's when I think I just remember the outro to Floods being, a complete obsession for me, and then my obsession changed to being Phil and Dime, rather than just Phil.
When I thought of my earliest memories of Dimebag, I just got one image in my head, and it could have been Kerrang on Metal Hammer, posters, and it was always the promotional shot, and you'll know it. It's Dimebag, flying V in one hand, with the Confederate flag and all that, red beard. And I think he's doing the horns like forward and that.
Yeah.
And that's the picture that jumps straight into my head, right in there. And I was like, there it is then. That's got to be one of the earliest.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got similar-ish, but I mean, it might be earlier. But again, it's from a poster. And I kind of remember him, you can't really see his face because he just got a mop of hair. And he's actually in midair. So his legs are out. And he's kind of playing guitar, and he's got like blue cut-off denim cargo shorts.
And back then, like you talk about, like I said, you being more into Phil and not really appreciating guitars. But when you sort of started to pick up on that element, did you think back then that he is one of the best guitar players you've ever heard?
No, I didn't really. No, that kind of came with time, and appreciation. Looking back. When I was older, not what I was appreciating at the time. I was getting in, all of this metal was coming to me like at an early-ish age, sort of, I don't know what I would have been, probably 12, 13.
Yeah.
And I was everything was coming at once, do you know what I mean? I was listening to Metallica's back catalogue and getting into that while listening to Pantera. And I was listening to things like, say, the Master of Puppets solo, and then listening to Walk at the same time for the first time. So I wasn't really comparing equally. I wasn't comparing fairly, but also it wasn't really entering my head. And that's probably why I was like, I love the aggression of Phil. But guitar-wise, I was like getting all my jams from Orion and, Creeping Death and all that sort of stuff. Did
a better appreciation of his guitar player come from a personal perspective? You mentioned Floods, or more because people were constantly saying it? Because for me,
no, it's definitely my own personal perspective. When I grew up listening to metal, I didn't really have a lot of metal friends. That was kind of me and Metal Hammer, me and Terrorizer, and then one by one I converted people and made my own metal friends, But for me, it was appreciation for the most part that came from just listening. And I think getting older, I do think getting older is a part of it, where I was, the younger side of me, it was more angry and aggressive. So Phil was what I related to. Wanted to shout, punch people, all that sort of stuff. And then as you get older and you maybe mature and settle down, even just a small amount, they started appreciating the beauty of a solo or the melody or something like that.
And talking of which, then, when it came to the collapse of Pantera, did you find yourself taking a side, or were you even that aware of the details surrounding the Pantera collapse?
I was aware quite early on in the fact that the band weren't friends. From the Great Southern Trendkill days, from the problems that Phil was having with substance abuse and the fact that they'd recorded those vocals and music completely separately. I knew that. I remember knowing that, and I remember thinking like things weren't all good in the band. But obviously, the social media and quick news wasn't really quite so prevalent back then. So shit came like slow. You would drip fed stuff. You might get a 30-word article in a magazine at the end of the month, and that's all you've heard.
Yeah.
And that's literally it, or it might not get covered at all. So you didn't always know everything that was going on.
Absolutely.
But you got little snippets that you started, I guess you formed your own ideas of what was going on. I was quite oblivious to a lot of this stuff when I was younger, but only by choice. I chose to be oblivious to it. I bought into the whole idea of brotherhood of bands and everything like that from a young age. And it used to cut me deep when a band didn't get on, when a band I loved didn't get on, for whatever reason, whether it's Metallica or Pantera or anything. I used to hate it. It used to make me so fucking angry. And I used to, I guess, shield yourself from it, but just, it's okay. Shit you can't do these days. You can't avoid it now. It's every single article on it. So it was it was definitely a case of that. I wasn't aware of the full extent of the problems in the band, other than that it weren't cool. But I also didn't care when they broke up, because I remember the shit that was kind of being spoken about at the time was that it was always a case of that they were always trying to work on things. Phil's reached out to Vinny or this sort of stuff, and it always felt like these are all temporary.
Yes.
And to be fair, it was a lot of the time there were arguments between the band, and they were always back together for another album. They didn't ever officially kind of go on hiatus or split or anything like that. But there was always little bits of press here and there that Phil and somebody weren't talking. That was just Phil's thing. And then you'd get the next album that was all cool. So when you heard that Pantera were having problems and they might split up or they were splitting up, I kind of just was like, "That's okay, they'll be all right. Get back together. They're all still alive."
Yeah, you definitely got a little more knowledge than me. I tried to sort of think about when I'd first sort of heard about it, and the best I could come up with is I didn't really. I think the first I would have heard about it was upon Dimebag's murder and hearing about Damageplan, and then being like, oh, that was what came out of Pantera, because obviously Pantera hadn't done anything for a couple of years.
Yeah, that's really the thing. It was never, and that's, like I was saying, it was never like an officially a hiatus or anything like that. It was just they weren't talking.
Yeah.
That was it. So they had their other band, but by then that was quite a common thing anyway. Phil had done
different things, down, and Damageplan. Just take a break.
So in my head, it was like, it's all good. They're doing what they're doing. They'll come back together. I'll still go and see them.
Yeah,
it wasn't like a band kind of coming out all standing together. United releasing a statement saying, we're officially calling it a day. It wasn't like that at all. It just kind of, things were just, they're having a bit of a tiff.
Which then brings us on to keep it Dimebag focused and not Pantera. The formation of Damageplan, 2003. What were your thoughts on Damageplan? Obviously, it only had one album, Newfound Power, the debut. Did you give them much time? Did you like them?
No, I didn't give it any time at all, to be honest with you. Never gave it any time. Even now, I don't think I've ever given it any time.
That's track by track for the future, isn't it? It's got to be.
Yeah, I know very little about it. I wasn't interested in it. I wasn't taking sides or anything like that, but I think for me, generally, because of the fact that there'd been a big gap between the fallout of Great Southern Trendkill and this happening, that I'd moved on.
Yeah, that.
I was listening to other bands. I was getting into black metal. I was, listening to I was starting to get into the melodic death metal Scandinavian scene. I was into a lot of At the Gates and stuff at the time. So I guess I wasn't so bothered.
I don't think as well Damageplan got a ton of press either in the UK because they'd basically gone back to the roots, starting again, and they were doing club show tours. And I don't even remember hearing about this album coming out, Newfound Power, which was originally going to be the band's name, which is a terrible fucking band name, Newfound Power. Now that would not, considering the annotations that are thrown at Dimebag, that would not help matters at all as a band name.
But I don't think Phil, from what I remember anyway, back in the day, Phil was always like a bit of a press darling in the UK.
True.
Like in terms of metal press. If Vinny and Dime were unhappy with Phil, it's more likely that there'd be a Phil article.
Yeah.
Like siding with him in one of the magazines than you'd hear about Damageplan.
It makes sense as well, because obviously the vocalist of Pantera, quite outspoken, quite loud and all that, and then would obviously go on to form Down, which was obviously quite a big deal straight away compared to what the Abbott brothers were doing in Damageplan, which was less of a big deal. Yeah. Almost like the press in the UK may have taken a side.
Yeah, and also I guess to a degree it probably wasn't helped or was helped by the fact that Rex was with Phil. Not in sides, but in the band. And to an outsider, that meant it was the Abbott brothers versus. So if it had been everyone versus Phil, it might have been an easy decision to make.
Yeah,
but it wasn't.
No, I agree. And of course, then here is the details. On December 4th, 2004, Damageplan were performing at the Alrosia Villa nightclub in Columbus, Ohio. As the band played the first song of its set list, Nathan Gale, a deranged fan, rushed onto the stage and shot Dimebag multiple times with a pistol. The band's head of security, Jeffrey Mayhem Thompson, tried to tackle Gale, but was also fatally shot in the ensuing struggle. A fan, Nathan Gray, was also murdered as he attempted to aid Abbott and Thompson, as was Aaron Hulk, an employee at a venue who tried to disarm Gale while he was reloading. This is very important to remember. It does get forgotten. A lot of people actually died in this shooting. 3 others were wounded before Columbus police officer entered the club and shot Nathan Gale once in the head, killing him. Dimebag was pronounced dead at the scene, aged 38 years old. Where did you first hear about this death?
I'm trying to think. I think, if I'm correct, I remember being in a pub when I heard about this.
Interesting.
Or was I? Was I at work? I might have been at work. I think I heard about it. I know I was. I remember now. I was at work. I was actually working at the fruit place where I was working, Chingford Fruit. Back in the day, I remember I was sitting in the warehouse office and I was on the internet and I was just looking through like new things, like metal kind of, metal hammer sites and, whatever there was around. And I remember it wasn't like, again, even back in these days, the internet was obviously prevalent and all that now, but it wasn't like instant fucking reactions to anything like that. And I remember seeing it, and my first reaction to it was that it probably wasn't true. Like this can't have happened. This is, this isn't real. This sort of thing that had happened like yesterday after, in America, different time zones and all that. And kind of just leaving it at that. And I remember it because where I worked, I was like working with a couple of other geezers around my same age who didn't give a fuck about metal.
Yeah.
And me being kind of, I don't know, like them sort of speaking to me like, "You're right." Do you know what I mean? That sort of thing. Like I was in a state of shock. And I was like, "Oh, yeah." And then telling people what had happened, and everyone just being like, "Oh, all right, whatever."
Yeah.
Because people don't really understand. Somebody died somewhere. Oh, okay, that kind of happens all the time, Brendan.
Yeah. Why are you so bothered about it?
Do you know what I mean? And then I remember kind of, it playing on my mind and all that sort of stuff. And then I can't remember when it was, like the next day or whatever, like kind of finding out more and reading up more on it and it being real. And all the statements were starting to come out from the other musicians and, things like that about what happened. And yeah, it was emotional. I remember being very emotional about it, being very, very cut up and sad about it, but only for a short period of time, without meaning to sound too cruel. And that was probably because I hadn't really had an affection towards Pantera for the best part of like 6-7 years by then.
Fair point. Yeah. Okay.
So the shock of what happened was probably more about the scenario.
Yeah,
at that time.
Yeah, right. That was it for me, because I remembered it was Kerrang magazine weekly that I saw that in. So it might have been days after the events and stuff like that. And it was shocked. But as you just said there, I remember just being more shocked that these days, but at that time, the idea of someone being gunned down while playing music by a crazy fan, the only one I could draw parallels to was obviously John Lennon, X amount of years before and so on. And it was like, I wasn't alive for John Lennon. So the fact I was alive for a metal musician who been killed on stage, it boggled my mind.
Yeah. You know? And I didn't understand a lot of the shit that I understand now. I didn't understand like why somebody would be in a crowd with a gun.
Yeah.
I didn't understand that.
Like how he couldn't have been stopped. Yeah, which
is that I probably didn't even fully understand that, Americans could carry guns properly, because it wasn't really in my thinking,
Okay, so we're going to get into some speculation now, and the important word is speculation, because I've looked deep and hard at this, and there's a lot of belief, as rumors spread and they become fact. And these aren't facts, this is speculation. So it has been speculated for years that Dimebag's killer was reportedly upset that Pantera had broken up and may have blamed Dimebag for the band's split. That alongside the supposed rumor that he shouted something about Pantera before rushing the stage, which I've again looked into, and no one can properly confirm this is truth. What do you make of these stories? And if they were true, why blame Dimebag, do you think?
I mean, obviously I have no opinion on whether they're true or not. I find it hard. I mean, I know there's also been, obviously, I don't know how any of this is proved, but I know there were talk about him being, I can't remember what he was afflicted by, but having some mental health condition. So I find it hard to compute in my head why any person would bring a gun to a concert and go up and shoot somebody unless they did blame them for something. If it was purely a schizophrenia or something of that sort, why would it have to be Dimebag?
Yeah.
You could have shot for, who knows, 40,000 people on the way to the stage. So I struggle to understand, like, surely if you shot Dimebag and you targeted Dimebag, you targeted him for a reason. So I don't know whether that reason was he blamed him or not. I mean, I could understand why somebody would, in a way.
Yeah.
I don't blame him. I never blamed him personally, but it was always, back then, it was always kind of, Vinny was outspoken, yes, but the two figureheads of Pantera were Dime and Phil.
Yeah.
That's how it was. Even when I was talking about, me being always a Phil kind of guy back in the day, and then appreciating Dime, I never even brought Rex or Vinny into my my discussion. You were in Phil's camp, or you were in Dime's camp. It wasn't Phil's or Vinny; it was Phil's or Dime's.
Yeah.
So and I'm not saying there's no fucking trying to justify it or anything like that, but I can understand that if you were picking a side, it would be Dime would be one side and Phil would be the other.
Oh yeah, I completely agree with that. Particularly as well, like even if you want to throw Vinny into the mix, there it is the Abbott brothers. They are brothers, so they're always going to be a united front. So I completely get that, and obviously tied into that. I mean, what followed? The press, particularly, I remember this vividly. The press picking up and running with what Anselmo, his war of words between him and Dimebag regarding the disbandment of Pantera, including the obvious statement. Now, I've obviously snipped a part of the statement. That is the one that most people run with, which was that Dimebag deserves to be beaten severely, which is what Anselmo had said in the December 2004 edition of the UK Metal Hammer magazine. Obviously, Dimebag died in 2004. And there's the links that people start connecting up and going all that. I find it very hard to believe that an American fan would have even got hold of a UK Metal Hammer magazine that came out that month for that. But obviously, a lot of blame then went on Phil because of statements like that. So that blame and those issues between Anselmo, Vinny, and Dimebag's girlfriend, long-term girlfriend, I mean, where do you sit on that front? I mean, not saying you blame anyone, but obviously those war of words and the issues surrounding, which obviously never got solved because Vinny obviously died a few years back, so they've never had a chance to properly reconnect or possibly reconnect.
Yeah, I mean, who's to blame for a lot of the problems in the world? Not just that, but the real fault a lot of the time in this is sensationalizing headlines in the press. Because in these sorts of situations, what the press becomes, the metal press, whatever it is, our websites, fan forums, whatever it is, it all becomes about sensationalizing something, and it becomes like the middle ground in a playground argument between, you know, the press are being running up to Vinny and going, "Did you hear what Phil said about you?" And then they're running to Phil and saying, "Did you hear what Vinny said about you?"
Yeah.
And then they're plastering it all over their pages. Now, I remember reading obviously a lot of Phil stuff, and I can tell you pretty much for a fact, I'm sure we could probably dig this shit out if we dug hard enough, that you could probably find 20 articles back in the day of Phil saying somebody should have the shit beaten out of them.
Yeah.
You know, because that's the character he, yeah. And the press would happily print that every single time because that was, you know, Phil calls this musician out, Phil calls this guy out.
Yeah.
And that was their Kerrang selling Phil Anselmo front cover. You know, and then at the same time, then when Phil, you can't then as the press pick out the one time he said it and then associate that one with it.
But it did.
You know, when you've been the vessel, you know, the delivery method for it all along. So I think what a lot of what happened was probably arguments between 2 or 3 or 4 human beings that without the media glare would probably have just fucking resolved it themselves, either through having a fisticuffs in a fucking car park one day or just leaving each other alone for a few years and shaking hands at the end of it. Something that's next to impossible to do when every second day or every issue of every magazine has to say what's going on with Phil and Dime and Vinny now. So yeah, if you know, who do I blame? I blame for a lot of life problems the fact that the media need a story and they will chase that to fucking death.
I mean, I completely echo that. I think Phil is a wholly unlikable guy a lot of the time, and back then it made it even easier to go, let's sick the dogs on him because he's an easy target and he could take it to a degree. And obviously when one member's been murdered, it makes it even easier, particularly if you're a fan or someone who'd grown to dislike Phil and all that, and that heavy hammering, because I remember that distinctly. That for a long time is all you'd ever hear about.
You got to remember a lot of the time with all of these things, especially like say after Dime died, Vinny said things about Phil. Vinny didn't say them to the press. Vinny was asked a question.
Yep.
You know, at a time when he probably doesn't feel like he wants to be asked any fucking questions. Have you got anything to say to Phil right now? Do you know what I mean? It's stirring shit to get your headline.
The biggest problem I want to add to the whole statement, the biggest problem that kind of fell from it was that, and it's weirdly parallel to what he did quite in the last couple of years, Anselmo, which is rather than just come out and say, look, I said that shit and I was wrong, he tried to deny it. He said it was taken out of context. And then Vinny had come out and said that he had heard the full recordings and it wasn't taken out of context. And then Phil had to come out and be like, look, I didn't really mean it. I'm sorry, all that crap. And obviously that's quite draws parallels to the stupid shit he did a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like, oh, fucking hell, guys. Like that, there's, you know.
Yeah. Stop. You get no defense from me on the fact that Phil can be a right fucking idiot.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not trying to like claim that any of that he was innocent in any of it. The only thing I would never accept is that Phil is to blame for Dime's death.
I think there's
only one person who's to blame for Dime's death. One person alone, and that's
I think that's the perfect place to cut off there then, because that is you're absolutely right, and I think that's a great statement to make, and I agree with you. And so we'll end on a bit more of a positive thing, in the sense of your thoughts on his influence and legacy.
It's a weird one, isn't it, in a way, because I know through other bands and reading their stuff and whatnot that Dime has influenced a hell of a lot of general guitarists, even to the likes of an idiot like me who can barely play Happy Birthday. But I bought a guitar because of people, not exclusively, but people like Dime. I can tell you now, and this has always been true all the way through my life, my dream is to own a Gibson Flying V.
Okay.
It always has been. And that's always been because of Dime. That was the first guitar I fell in love with. I tried to save up £220 to buy a black one out of cash converters in Woolwich when I was younger, but before I could get it, it had already been sold by the time I'd saved up the money. So I went in there and I came out with a different guitar instead. And I remember being devastated. And that's the sort of influence, it had on me. And even if we were talking about it the other day, because I've got like 4 guitars now and I still haven't got a Gibson Flying V. I was talking about it with somebody the other day saying, yeah, that's the guitar I'll get one day. I'll get one. So from a personal side, huge influence. Legacy in metal, it's kind of strange because it's such a weird thing, isn't it, with Pantera? It was short, sharp, done, gone.
And
It
it's
wasn't
been
something
a little bit eroded as time goes by,
Yeah, so you're talking like, what did we get, like over the space of less than a decade, it was here and it was done and it was finished. I think Dimebag is a phenomenal guitarist. One of the best in the world. I genuinely do think he is. And I do think that even if he hadn't been murdered, he would have been recognized as that. Because I think that's one of the things. I think sometimes people think that,
pedestal.
is he famous because he got killed, like Kurt Cobain or someone like that? But I don't think that's the case with Dimebag. I think he was a phenomenal musician. I think if Damageplan, this is probably going to be a bold statement, maybe unfair. If Damageplan had continued on and Down had continued on and everything like that, I wonder if Dime's legacy would have been tarnished, because I think part of the reason why Dime was held in such high esteem was because he was part of a 4-man unit that worked perfectly together. It wasn't just about Dime's guitars, it was about the fact that Dime's guitars are there and fills, and take any element out of Pantera and it doesn't work anymore. And Damageplan were always going to be held up against Pantera, and it's unlikely they would ever have been held in the same esteem.
You can answer that immediately simply by going, when people talk about Dimebag's greatest work, no one's going, oh yeah, Damageplan. No one.
Yeah, Dimebag is the guitarist of Pantera. That's and that alone, to be honest, that's all it's referred to.
Yeah.
But look, realistically, he came, he slayed, he inspired a generation, and then he was gone. And it's terribly, terribly sad. It's just, I don't know, it's one of those things, isn't it? What can you do now? You can remember him, and I think they do a good job of remembering him. It bothers me that remembrance these days is still in the press done in an attacking way, and it still hasn't got to the point where people can just say remember him on his anniversary without digging up articles of, oh, do you remember the time Phil said this? Do you know what I mean? So, but hopefully we get to that point. It's been a long time now. I think he'll be held in high esteem for eternity. And rightly so. And I'm all right with that. You know what I mean? I don't think it's incorrect. So probably one of the, not the, but one of the greatest metal guitarists we will ever have seen or not seen, as the case is.
There is that as well. I mean, I echo everything Brendan said, absolutely the sentiments as well. We hope we've given it as much respect as we possibly can. As I say, we don't want to talk about for hours and hours and hours and go into too much depth about Pantera and stuff like that. It was about the event. So, of course, if you've got any thoughts on it as well, you want to share, by all means do. Tell us in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. You can check us out on gbhbl.com as well as on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and Tumblr. Go to Patreon to help us out over there. That's patreon.com/gbhbl, as well as Big Cartel, where you can find some of our merchandise. We have a podcast running on SoundCloud and Apple Podcasts. And of course, if you like this video, do us a favour, hit the subscribe button and help the channel grow. Games, horror and heavy metal. What else is life for?